It's time for the Elsa Show interview series. Tonight's guest, Gold Star father, author, successful businessman, and host of Constitution Solution, one podcast under God, Mark Deluzio.
Well, hello, my friends. As you can see right beside me, sort of, kind of, is my friend Mark Deluzio. He is back again. We are wrapping up, as promised, our conversation about Marxism. And if you haven't seen it, please go watch it. I think it's a great episode, if I may say so myself. There's a lot of great information in there from Mark, not from me. But it was a great conversation. And, we kind of left it off at, well, we talked about the problem quite a bit. And, that's pretty common. I think that we all collectively like to talk about the problem, point out the problem, but how do we fight this? What are the, what are the solutions? I don't know if solution is the right word. I think fight against it is really the phrase that we're probably really looking for.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we would be absolutely remiss if we didn't at least touch on the second assassination attempt of President Donald Trump. And I love to always say President Donald Trump because they get so mad when I don't say former president. And they get in the comments and like, don't call him President Trump. He's not the president. I'm like, if it makes you mad, I'm going to do it now. So there you go. There you have it.
Exactly.
So anyhow, most importantly, welcome back. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks. I feel like I'm a boomerang. You throw me out and I come back.
I just whip you right around.
Yeah. But no, glad to be here. I love what you guys are doing, and just glad to be part of what you're doing because I think getting the word out. By the way, which is going to be one of the 6 or 7 things I talk about today with nullification. I'm with pushing back on Marxism. By the way, is things like this, like shows like what you're doing, and and by the way, just a word on President Trump. You and I talked about it prior to this. They're not going to stop, Elsa. They're not going to stop going after him. And you cannot count on the government if you really think through. And I know maybe, again, sounding like a black helicopter conspiracy theorist, but there's enough evidence now to say that JFK was killed by our own government. Mm-hmm. So was Robert F. Kennedy, probably Martin Luther King, and all the other assassination attempts on Reagan and all that. None of these guys act alone. And, right. The incompetence that we've seen with the Secret Service, I said on one of your other shows that looking at the Afghan pullout, it was so screwed up, and I could not have improved on the screw ups in terms of making it worse.
You couldn't have screwed up more if you tried.
And when you look at what's going on here, just some of the basic stuff as it relates to security, you've got to argue that it's intentional. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you look at the time frame, right? So this guy was there for 12 hours, set up around, that's the as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong on any points. Now, the latest intel that I got, it's not intel, it's just public knowledge. The latest that I heard was that he was there, they know, because of a phone ping since from like 1:30 in the morning. Of course, the incident happened around like 1:30 in the afternoon. This was, and here's the clincher really of everything that tells you a whole heck of a lot, that this was an unscheduled outing. That this was kind of a last minute thing. Trump decided that, I feel like playing some golf. Let's set that up. Let's do that. And so, of course, the question is, how does a guy who is from North Carolina, lives in Hawaii, how does he get to Florida in the exact time frame, basically, that he needs to be there in a location that he doesn't belong in, and have this possible opportunity? How does that happen? All you can imagine is that someone on the inside, tipped him off.
I don't know what else to say. I mean, I was watching Dan Bongino the other day, testified in front of Congress, and, Bongino was an ex-Secret Service.
Right.
And some of the things that he came out with, I mean, there's absolutely no question in my mind that this is not an accident, and this is not incompetence.
Yeah.
So, and I just think President Trump should take the move now and just get his own security detail.
Yes.
And tell the Secret Service to go screw. And
I really wish he would. I wish he would. You can't trust him for anything,
No, you can't.
Not at this point.
No.
I love, one of the recent interviews with Kamala, they asked her, does she feel safe? Do you feel safe? And she's, I feel safe. Well, of course you feel safe. Of course you do. And I'm not throwing any accusations out. I'll just leave it right there.
Yeah, sometimes what you don't say is pretty powerful.
Yeah.
But there's a whole thing too with a plot of a pipe bomb where she was one at DNC headquarters that day. Bongino talks about it. I won't get into that now, but that plot failed because they didn't need it. They needed what happened on January 6th was enough for them.
Yeah.
And but anyway, I just look at this regime that we got in there right now. And
well, they, so their tactic, I think, has changed a little bit, not much, just a little bit in the response to this one. The first one, they at least generally made a show of, we don't think this is a good thing. This is terrible. We don't find that acceptable at all. This time around, the talking heads are all saying basically the same thing. Well, Trump needs to turn down the rhetoric. He brought this on himself. It's like victim blaming, which they did that the last time too. But they waited a day or two. They just started, right off the bat. Well, basically he brought it on himself. He did it to himself. And that's been their kind of go-to. And I have, if you don't mind, I want to share this. This is a recent clip an exchange between Peter Doocy, who I think is fantastic, right? He's so great. Oh, love that guy. And Karine Jean-Pierre, his favorite, target. And what she said in response to his question, honestly, I think this was one of the things that just made my head explode more than anything else, because it's such an open gaslighting. And I'm just going to play it, and I want to get your thoughts on it. Here it is.
2 days since somebody allegedly tried to kill Donald Trump again. And you're here at the podium in the White House briefing room calling him a threat. How many more assassination attempts on Donald Trump until the president and the vice president and you pick a different word to describe Trump other than threat?
Peter, if anything from this administration, I actually completely disagree with the premise of your question, the question that you're asking. It is also incredibly dangerous in the way that you're asking it, because American people are watching. And to say that from an administration who has consistently condemned political violence, from an administration where the president called the former president and was grateful that he was okay, from an administration who has called out January 6th, called out the attack of Paul Pelosi, called out and said we need to lower the temperature after the Butler incident. And now for you to make that kind of comment in your question, because your question involved a comment and a statement. And, it is, that is also incredibly dangerous.
So, lots of things in that. One, it's the runaround non-answer. She's not really answering the question. She's, deflecting and turning it around and quite literally calling him and anyone who says what he says or questions what he's questioning is dangerous. And that's one of their favorite, things to call everyone else who's using their, as they like to call it, misinformation or dangerous speech, which, Tim Walz, our favorite socialist, came right out and said, what was it that he said? I'm drawing a blank now. He said, he's got one where he says, one person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. And then he said, oh no, it was his attack on free speech, that, free speech isn't necessarily protected. Your speech isn't necessarily protected if it's misinformation. So, I mean, just
I want to know how you downgraded him to a socialist.
I know you're right.
He's an outright Marxist.
Yeah, you're right.
And it's interesting though. You and I kind of kicked this around a couple of times. They're always going to accuse you of what they're guilty of. Okay, yes. That's a tactic. And when she says it's dangerous and that you're doing this, his question was the same to them. So she turns around and just reflects it back to him. Now, where exactly did the president call for peace and unity? He was supposed to be the president of unity, by the way. Right. When he calls all Trump supporters terrorists, he calls them all non-America. How about the African American guy where he said, "If you don't vote for me, you're not black."
Right.
What about
Mhm.
calling Trump a Hitler?
Yeah.
Comparing him to that, how instilled the riots on January 6th when he
Mhm.
did no such thing.
Right.
That they Kamala alone in the debate brought up Charlottesville.
Yeah.
And how racist President Trump was because of Charlottesville and what he said, and then she tied him to the Proud Boys.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if that doesn't instill hatred on this man,
Right.
unfairly, by the way, but it instills hatred. I don't know what else does.
Yeah,
I mean,
unfairly, inaccurately, disproven time and again.
they're demonizing President Trump, and they're wondering why people are going after him. Well, I happen to think otherwise as to who's going after him, but we'll leave that off the table for a minute.
Yeah, whoever those people might be are using mentally disturbed people as their, as their weapons, right?
And by the way, I just gave you 4 examples of Hitler, the riots, Charlottesville, and all that, Proud Boys. There's other language that was used against him that they just demonized the heck out of this guy.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times they called this guy a racist.
Mm-hmm.
Never forgetting when Jesse Jackson actually gave him an award when he was a real estate agent, estate developer in New York City for the great things he did for minorities.
Yeah.
Okay.
All the people that hate him now loved him. Oprah Winfrey.
They loved him because he had a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay. But I mean, come on, he was invited to Hillary Clinton's wedding.
Right.
So what can I tell you? I mean,
yeah.
And so, but once he got in and started calling it what it was and challenging the military-industrial complex, pulling out of all the globalist accords, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, when he started taking money out of their piggy bank.
Mm-hmm.
He did not go to war.
Right.
The only president I can remember that didn't do that. And that put a little dent in their piggy bank. If you look at, and then of course, Biden hires Lloyd Austin, who was on the board for Raytheon. Damn well we were going to go to war with that guy in the Defense Department. Okay. And we are right now in war, where Kamala claimed that we are not. I was going to say,
according to Kamala, no.
We have no troops anywhere. I don't know if you saw the video of the guys deployed in Syria. And it's like, I mean, I can't even honor that with a comment like it's a slap in the face. It's so much worse than that.
Yeah.
And to the, the fighting men and women that are out there risking their lives right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Biden says we didn't lose anybody on his watch, I don't know. Maybe those 13 people that got killed in the Afghan pullout were just, maybe they were, militants from some other country,
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'd like for him to say that to the family's faces.
I can't believe the lies that they tell. And so I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
And she is one of the DEI hires. What's her initials? JKPLG? I don't know. But you look at look at Budovich, who knows nothing about transportation and supply chains. All these DEI hires that they have out there. DEI stands for didn't earn it, right?
Mm-hmm.
DEI.
Yes.
And you just look at this government and some of the military that I know, special forces that I know, saying that you're not going to believe this, the training we have to go through. Transgender diversity sensitivity training. I mean, I don't know what that has to do with defending our country, but anyway, it's frustrating. It really
it is. Yeah, and I'll tell you, and I think it was like this latest attempt on Trump. I have to admit, I have a pretty strong resolve. I'm pretty, nose to the grind and just keep your eye on the prize and all those things. This kind of knocked the wind out of me a little bit. Like it's just so overwhelming. We have so far to go and so much to fight against. And I'm genuinely sad. I'm genuinely sad that I feel like I'm really looking at the end of America as we know it. And, I don't want to be a doomsdayer. I don't want to say that that's written in stone, but when these things keep happening and you keep seeing, and it's more for me, it's not that these people are trying to do this. Of course, this is what they do. This is what evil does. But it just feels like there's so many people that are buying into it, and that's kind of, a large part of why we're doing this episode, because
Right.
we need some tools here. We need the tools to recognize and to resist and to fight back against this and educate. And I think that really is the biggest key, probably right there. Educate people, and do it in
You're
a
right.
way.
You are right on the money on that, and even in the back of my business card, on my Constitution business card, I have several business cards, but that's one of them, is that, a quote by Thomas Jefferson: "A well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny." And we are not well-informed as a nation. I'm sorry.
No.
That's why I love your
Woefully
podcast. I love what you and Clay are doing, and just got to get a perspective out there and make people think a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking is required to be a conservative. It's not required to be a liberal. All you need there is feelings.
Mm-hmm. That's all that matters. How you feel.
And since my wife tells me I have no feelings, I can never be a liberal. Okay, so
it's okay, Mark. I get accused of that all the time.
I happen to doubt
My
that.
husband says he said I might be lacking a little bit of a sensitivity chip.
Yeah, I'll be sensitive, all right. Well, let's get. I've got like 6 or so key things, Elsa. You asked a question at the end of the last episode on Marxism. Mm-hmm. So that episode, we kind of went through some of the tenets of Marxism. Right. And again, I would highly recommend people buy the Communist Manifesto.
Yes.
And read it. It's not long. It will take you probably an hour to read. But you'll get the gist. And then as you read it, I highly recommend you think about what's going on today and see if there's any parallels to that. And I think you'll find there are plenty. So I'm going to go through like 6 things. I want to talk about our elected officials. I want to talk about globalist organizations. I want to talk about unconstitutional agencies, the Federal Reserve. I want to talk about the gold standard, which ties into the Federal Reserve, believe it or not, and nullification. Okay, I want to talk about this whole concept of nullification. And by the way, there's other things as well, but one of them, overarching in all of this, is our divorcing our society from God. Okay, and taking prayer out, and this whole separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. It is okay to pray on the congressional floor, or in your state house, or in your local town hall. You can pray. You can pray in a classroom. There's nothing unconstitutional or illegal about doing that. But that whole separation of church and state got misconstrued by a racist Supreme Court judge who was in the KKK. And anyway, that's maybe a subject for another day.
Actually, you know what, Mark, if you don't mind, I know we have so many topics, so many parts of this we want to cover, but I think that really does need to be explained, because I see that crop up all the time.
Sure.
Explain to the listeners how they can explain, because I know we're talking to a like audience for the most part. I know we generally, and I include myself, that get the gist of it. So give this to us in a way for us to explain it.
Okay. Well, let me start with what's called the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution. That's very easy to understand. What it means is that a federal law is the law of the land, provided its Constitution, I say pursuant thereof, it's constitutional. A federal law is the law of the land. Okay, and so states cannot reject a federal law as long as it's constitutional, right? They cannot override a federal law. So that's the Supremacy Clause. Now, after the Constitution was settled in Danbury, Connecticut, there were some Baptists, and they were kind of the minority there, okay? And they were really worried because the state of Connecticut, Connecticut's Constitution did not have a protection of religion like our First Amendment did, okay? In our First Amendment, which is one of the first amendments of our Bill of Rights, our first 10 amendments is our Bill of Rights, is the guarantee that Congress will make or establish no religion or prohibit the exercise of religion, right? And also in that is free speech, right to assemble, protest, and all that. So the Baptists were really worried because in Danbury, Connecticut, they're saying, hey, look, the Connecticut Constitution does not give us that protection. And they were worried because they were a minority and they were kind of shunned in some respect, that they were going to get shut down by the state of Connecticut, right? Or kicked out or whatever. Thomas Jefferson wrote them a letter to the Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut, and said, the supremacy clause, basically the First Amendment, you're covered, okay? Because there is a separation of church and state. He used that term in the letter, okay, to the Danbury Baptists. Now, go 150, 200 years later, in the early, I think it was the 1940s, and I forget the Supreme Court justice's name, but I'll get it for you. A case came up that had to do with religion and government, okay? And he cited the separation of church and state as a tenet of our Constitution. Now, this Supreme Court judge was a member of the KKK, which, by the way, by definition, hates especially Catholics, okay? And he put that in there, and all the liberals grasped onto that statement, saying, yeah, the Constitution has a separation of church and state, and it does not have a separation of church and state. You can actually have, a nativity scene on the lawns of Congress. You can pray in a public building, in your classroom.
Right.
You could do that, okay? But that's what got misconstrued, like a lot of things got misconstrued by the courts, okay, and by the people. Now, let's just understand the root cause of this. The root cause of this is Marxists do not want a God.
Right.
Okay? So this fit right into their narrative in terms of, divorcing God from, forget about our government, from our society.
Yeah.
This fit right in. And still today, people will tell you, oh, there's a separation of church and state. And it's wrong. Okay. And it was taken out of context in what Jefferson meant to the Danbury Baptists. So that's
what it meant, like simplified, and please correct me if I don't understand. What it simply meant is that the government could not interfere with your practicing
Bingo.
your religion. Bingo. Correct?
Yep.
Okay.
That's what it meant. That's what it meant. It did not mean you can't pray in a public building. It did not mean any of that stuff. And but that's how it got construed. And by the way, that's how it was decided by this judge. And that was all by design, by the way. Okay, so that's the story, behind that. And again, once again, just like with the abortion in Roe v. Wade, I have a constitutional right to have an abortion. You had no such thing with Roe v. Wade at all, but it got misconstrued because people just don't understand the Constitution. Which is why I do my podcast, why you're doing your thing, why we're talking today about Marxism. Yeah. Because all of this is tied back to our Constitution and our freedoms.
And Roe v. Wade should have never gone to the federal government, right? It should have always stayed with the states, which is why this has been the battle forever and ever. There were two things wrong with, there's many things wrong with it, but two things wrong with the Roe v. Wade decision. And what was it, 1972, I think? Whatever it was. I think so.
Way back, early 70s. And it stood for over 50 years. The two things wrong with it. One, the 10th Amendment, which is part of the Bill of Rights, says that anything not enumerated in the Constitution is left to the states or to the people. Okay? Now, that 10th Amendment, by the way, is going to play in what we talk about today with the Marxism side of this. So that was the first thing. It was a state rights issue. Okay, the states needed to decide on abortion. That's the first mistake they made. The second mistake that they made is the courts, the Supreme Court, actually wrote law from the bench by putting in the trimester rules that states had to follow. So they put those trimester rules in place. I forget exactly how they were all orchestrated, but the first, trimester, you could do this, second this, third you can't, Right. And they wrote law. They actually wrote law and said, this is now the guidelines that states have to follow. So not only did they deny it's a states' rights issue, they told the state from the bench what to do.
Wow.
That was what was wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the crazy thing about it is I was against Roe v. Wade from a constitutional perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Divorced of my feelings about abortion, of which I detest abortion. Okay. But take that away for a minute. And the thing that people have to understand is that once they agree to an unconstitutional law, mandate, whatever, because they like it,
right,
they've just opened a Pandora's box for further transgressions on your freedoms, because something's going to come along that you're not going to like.
Yes.
Okay. And I'll use a really good example: non-smoking in restaurants. I hate smoking.
Right.
My parents smoked as a kid. I hated it. You know, in the back of our station wagon, my sister and I, and the windows closed in the winter with the heater on. I hated smoking. I didn't even try it as a teenager. I hated it so much. That has nothing to do with what I'm going to say. I do not believe the federal government or the state government, quite frankly, could ban a legal activity, smoking cigarettes, in a private business's establishment. See, I'm an Adam Smith guy as far as the economy goes, and let the market kind of fall where it is.
Right.
And if I find nobody wants to come to my bar or restaurant because I love smoking, I'm going to make that adjustment relative to the market.
Right.
Okay. But it's my property. You know, what's to say now you can't allow smoking in your own home? Okay. And again, I hate smoking.
Yeah.
The fact I hate smoking has nothing to do with it. And it should have nothing to do with it. People say, "Oh, I'm so glad they passed that because I hate cigarette smoke." You're missing the point.
Right.
Just don't go to that restaurant. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Because now that they've allowed that, there's other transgressions. You open up that Pandora's box, and you're going to allow them now a hall pass to be able to stomp on some other rights that you do care about.
And that's kind of exactly what it's been, right? A series of little hall passes that have gotten us to where we are right now, where the amount of government overreach is, you know, past the point of absurdity and into the point of sheer madness, you know, where we're now we're looking at it and going, how did we let this happen? Well, that's how. All these little hall passes, because enough people thought, well, I don't like smoking, so that's okay. Right. And instead of going by the letter of the Constitution and what they are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. And that's the slippery slope. Right. I have to tell you, the one that I never understand, the one I can never wrap my brain around. Well, there's plenty of things that I can't. But one of them that always sticks in my head. Talk to me about, and I'm sorry if I'm derailing you from your points, but
oh, that's fine. This is good.
Tell me about how states can force you to get a permit for a gun when gun ownership is a protected right in the Constitution. Am I correct?
From a pure technical constitutional perspective,
yeah,
they can't.
Okay.
You're absolutely
I feel like
right.
There's a but there. Is there a but?
No.
Okay.
No. It's evolved to that. Okay.
Yeah.
And
another hall pass moment, essentially. That
it's yes. Now I'm going to jump to number 6 because you just brought up something that needs to happen. Okay, it's called nullification. And what is nullification? This is one of the 6 things I was going to talk about today, Elsa, on how we could push back on the Marxist agenda that's being bestowed upon us. Okay, and if you haven't listened to the last episode that Elsa and I did, we talk about the parallels of the Communist Manifesto and what's going on in our government today, right? So I won't go through that and repeat that, but I will say this. The 10th Amendment does say, like I said earlier, that if not enumerated, if the people have not given the power to the federal government, that's what this means in the 10th Amendment, then the federal government can't do it, all right?
Okay.
And Article 1, Section 8 has the 18 enumerated powers of Congress. These are the things they can write laws about.
Okay.
All right. Now it's going to come in play a little bit later when we talk about the unconstitutional agencies. Okay. So the states and the state legislatures, and, you know, I think you and I have talked about this another time. Most politicians don't understand what their job is. Okay. And when you look at your state reps in your state or in my state, they all swear on the Bible to uphold the Constitution. They're our first line of defense at the state level to protect our constitutional rights. Okay, our state reps and senators, reps in particular. And they don't know their job. Okay. They don't know that they can nullify illegal mandates from the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
And those mandates come in terms of laws, regulations from unconstitutional agencies, executive orders. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they come from. And we had 3 examples so far of nullification, believe it or not, going all the way back to 1798. John Adams, as president, our second president, passed the Alien Sedition Acts. And there were 4 parts of that, but the one part that was most unconstitutional, it gave him the right to jail publicists who criticized the government.
Mm.
And this whole thing about misinformation and what we hear about today. Okay. And Jefferson and Madison, Jefferson out of being governor of Virginia and Madison, Kentucky, pushed back on that and nullified, said that is an unconstitutional mandate. And this state is not, our states are not going to abide by that mandate, by that law, the Alien Sedition Acts. Okay. It was subsequently overturned, but it further drove the rift between Jefferson and Adams.
Yeah.
They really were at each other's throat for quite some time. And I think I told you on one of the podcasts that they both died on the same day.
Yes.
July 4th of all days,
Ironic.
1826. Okay, 50 years to the day.
Wow.
After the signing of the Declaration. Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
And,
it really is.
But the Alien Sedition Acts, Adams wanted a bigger government. He wanted more control, just like Hamilton did.
Mm-hmm.
Madison and Jefferson were not those guys. They did not want. They wanted a limited government,
Mm-hmm.
and they won out in terms of how we started our country, in terms of the Constitution. But at the state level, Elsa, your representatives in your state and in my state, they don't only have a right to nullify; they have the obligation to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Push back. Now, some of the states have already pushed back on things like National ID Act. Okay. If you ever notice that little thing on your license, people, you'll see at the airports, by October, you have to get your national ID or you can't use your driver's license.
Yeah.
That's all about a national registry, national ID passed by George W. Bush in 2005. And that kept kicked down the road because there's like 12 or 15 states that are pushing back on that, saying, no, we ain't doing it. Okay.
Right.
And now I think they have a date out there another year out. I don't know when it's going to be now.
Mm-hmm.
I keep losing track, but it keeps getting pushed out.
Right.
Because the states are pushing back. So if you get a few states together to push back on the government, you can win. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an example. Okay. And so Alien Sedition. Now the other one was John Calhoun. He was the vice president of Andrew Johnson, and he actually resigned over this issue. It all had to do with tariffs. The South, they put tariffs on the South, selling their fabrics to Europe, and the North was the one importing from Europe. So it cost the North a heck of a lot more money because of these tariffs that were placed on the South's exports. Well, okay, that was put in by Andrew Jackson, and Calhoun actually resigned as vice president over this issue. And as a state legislator, he pushed back on these tariffs. Now, the country almost went into a civil war because of this.
Wow.
We became very close to a civil war. Okay. Now, the odd thing about this is Madison said, you have no right, Calhoun, to do that just because you don't like that law. Okay. There was nothing unconstitutional about it. You have no right. And so Madison, of all people who had the first, nullification effort along with Jefferson, argued with Calhoun saying, just because you don't like something doesn't mean you can't push back on it. Okay. Right. But what happened was, to avoid this civil war, Jackson eased the tariffs and avoided it would have been a civil war.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a big deal. It was a really big deal. All about these tariffs. So, but there is evidence of nullification, but not enough, in my opinion. We let this country just slip away and just we're just letting it slide into the abyss. So one of the things you could do is you go to your state representatives and insist that they nullify all these unconstitutional mandates that are being bestowed upon us. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, where are they coming from? Yeah. Okay.
So obviously, if I wanted to go down there and I shake my fist and say, you have to nullify this, it's not going to be just me. I would imagine I need signatures and petitions and lots of people
Yes.
on
You
board.
need to organize. You need to get groups together. There are groups out there that would most likely, fall in line in this regard.
Right.
But yeah, you're exactly right. But you get 50 people to write your congressman, and you're going to be surprised.
Yeah.
You're going to be surprised how powerful that is if they get 50 letters of the same ilk. I've written my congressman here, and all I get is a form letter back about how great he is. And
Yep.
no, and he's a Republican too, and he's awful.
Such a shame.
By the way,
we're fighting against that as well, by the way, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's on both sides of the aisle. Yeah. So anyway, that's nullification. But let me just talk about these unconstitutional agencies.
Yep.
Again, go back to that 10th Amendment and say to yourself, okay, well, if it's not enumerated in the Constitution, it's left to the states or to the people. Well, you tell me then, where is EPA, the Federal Communications Commission, the Department of Education? You go back and tell me, where does the CDC fit into this? The FDA? Any of these agencies are, and there's so many of them, I could sit here all day and talk to you about them, are unconstitutional. But what do these agencies do? They write regulations that have the power of law. Well,
I was just gonna ask you. So wait a minute, they're writing regulations that's as good as being law, because we follow these regulations as if they're laws, and if you don't follow them, you are breaking the law. So
you could end up in jail. You could end up in they could take your house, your property, your money, sue you, all kinds of things, right?
Right.
And so now, who do these branches of government report to? The executive branch, which is the president, for those of you in Rio Linda, right? I love Rush Limbaugh used to say that all the time. I so miss him. But the executive branch, the president, now has oversight of these agencies in order to enforce the laws that are written by Congress, which are many times very broad. Congress doesn't put their butts on the line to dictate these mandates because they get kicked out of office. So in some sense, Congress are cowards to set up these agencies, and they're being challenged right now, but it takes a long time to get these things undone once they're in.
Yeah.
One of the things I always thought about was how, in order to get something deemed unconstitutional, you have to bring a case in front of the Supreme Court. And there's thousands of cases every year that get put up against them, and they decide which ones they're going to pick. So that gives, again, a hall pass to Congress to write unconstitutional laws.
Right.
Because with the chances that it's probably not going to get caught. Okay. So that's a problem. But I'll tell you a quick story about the Department of Education. When I was running for Congress, I was talking about, defunding the Department of Education, which I think it's sitting around $60 billion with 4,000 people in it. I have no idea what they do. I have no idea what they do. I do know our education is not getting better. Okay. But
it's definitely not.
Well, I do know what they do, and I'll tell you what they do in a minute. So after my talk, this lady came up to me and she says, Mark, I work in the school system here, and if you get rid of the Department of Education, where are we going to get our funding from? And I looked at her and I said, well, can I ask you a question? She goes, sure. I said, where do you think they get the funding from? From you.
Taxpayers.
You sent, for every dollar you sent to them, you might get 50 cents back if you behave.
Right.
And do what they tell you to do, although they'll stop funding you. Okay. That's the problem. I'd rather keep that money here, keep it local. Education should be local. Well, I can't affect a bureaucrat in Washington.
Right.
Who do you call? Okay. So anyway, these agencies are unconstitutional, and Congress needs to just defund them.
Yeah.
That's it. Now they say, oh, you might shut the government down. Yeah, great. Great. It's just done on the weekends anyway.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Right.
I don't know. Saturday and Sunday this week. Are you going to be okay? I'm going to be okay. All right. And by the way, the scare tactics there are, seniors won't get their Social Security. That's wrong. There's financial engineering that you could do to get that fixed. That's easy to do. The military won't operate. No, absolutely not. That's mandated. That's going to happen. So the military is going to keep happening.
Right.
So that's the scare tactics that they use. So nullification, abolish unconstitutional agencies, and pushing back. Number one would be just continue to push back on your elected officials. Okay. Yeah. And remove culpable politicians that are not following our Constitution. And I'll tell you a quick story here. In Arizona, in the district I'm in Scottsdale, David Schweiker, who's a Republican, I went to a town meeting, a Republican meeting in Fountain Hills, which is the next town over from Scottsdale.
Mm-hmm.
And he got up on a stage. There's like 300 people in the audience. I'm sitting next to my buddy Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and he gets up there and he starts talking about the debt.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, well, our interest on our debt now is $1.2 trillion. Our debt is $35 trillion dollars, and this got to stop. Blah 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 blah. He's going on and on and on. He opened it up for questions. So they gave me the microphone. I was the first one. I said, Congressman, let's make sure we're clear on this. I said, when the Federal Reserve, which by the way is going to be another one of these things I'm talking about in a minute, when the Federal Reserve expands the money supply by printing money, by electronically printing money, then they take that money and they actually buy treasury bills and they infuse cash into the economy.
Mm-hmm.
So the money supply expands.
Yeah.
When they buy T-bills, that's debt to the government, who now have to pay you back on this phony money that you created out of nothing with interest with our taxpayer dollars. Okay. And the only guys that are making money here are the guys that are running the Federal Reserve. There's zero incentive for them to have a stable economy, which is what their mandate is. He goes, yes, that's exactly right. I said, okay. I said, so I have a question for you. I said, now that we're on the same plane about how the Federal Reserve works and how inflation happens, okay, how is it that you voted for the increase in the debt ceiling right in front of 300 people? He became irate.
Oh, I bet he did. I bet he did.
Head to the stage and looked down on me because he's up on,
Mm-hmm.
and he goes, well, let me ask you a question. He says, what do you think would happen to the bond market if we didn't do that? I go, look, I'm not here to answer your questions, I said, but I don't think the people in this room give a rat's ass about the bond market,
Mm-hmm.
but they do care about the supermarket.
Mm.
And that was a death blow.
Yeah.
That was a death blow to him. And
Absolutely.
then he went on to say, well, do you realize that we saved $100 billion of spending by doing that? Now he's defending it. I said, Congressman, you're defending it.
Mm-hmm.
You're defending what you said was bad originally. You can't have it both ways. Okay.
Right.
I said, by the way, $100 billion on a $5-6 trillion budget, that's chump change. And he says to me, and he looked down at me and said, I just wish everybody knew how to use a calculator. Next question.
Wow.
Yep. David Schweikert, District 1, Arizona.
I've got a guy in finance here in this. I'm going to share this. It's a little on the long side. I may even cut it off at some point because we'll get the gist of it. This is who we have in our government handling this type of stuff. Are you ready? Here we go.
The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
It obviously begs the question, why exactly are we borrowing in a currency that we print ourselves? I'm waiting for someone to stand up and say, why do we borrow our own currency in the first place?
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow? Well,
again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do? They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? Because they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah. So a lot of times, at least to my ear with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing, but there is no question that the government prints money and then it uses that money to, I guess.
We get the idea. We get the idea. Jared Bernstein, he's on the Council of the Economic Policies Committee. Advisor. Yeah. Currently. Or maybe he's off the job now. I don't really know.
I think I can't say this anymore, but a high school economics first-year student could explain that better than he could.
Was that painful or what?
It is painful. And you know what's sad about that? He's not even a DEI hire. That's sad.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there was like some version of nepotism or something. I mean, I don't know.
Well, a couple of things he said that were wrong, since we can go into the Federal Reserve, is the government doesn't print money. The Federal Reserve does. The Federal Reserve are 12 independent banks run by a board, independent corporations. They're independent, and they're not part of the government. They're not part of the federal government. They're not a government agency, the Federal Reserve. And they're the ones that control all the banking in the United States. And Thomas Jefferson really had a problem with a centralized banking system because of what we're about to talk about. And what they do is they literally, when you say print money, electronically go to a computer and create money out of thin air. Let's add $1 trillion to the money supply. And again, I just want to go back to your listeners on constitutional economics. Anytime you have more of anything, it's worth less. This is why you have inflation. So the textbook definition of inflation is the expansion of the money supply. So the more money you have, the less it's worth. So if you have $10,000 in the bank and they print money and inflation goes to 10%, the buying power, your bank balance will still say 10,000. The buying power will only be 9,000. Okay. And that's the problem with this. Now, these yo-yos that run these Federal Reserve banks, and I've been to one physically in Cleveland. I toured it. A lady that used to work for me worked there now, and she asked me to come in, and I did a tour. They have the one in Cleveland, they have a firing range, a shooting range. Wow. They have a whole arsenal. They have weapons. They have everything. Oh my, you're going to believe it. I saw pallets of money being burned.
Wow.
Pallets 4x4x4 like a Gaylord being burned. Okay, because they're taking old money out of the economy. Like, can you guys do a few samples? But anyway, but this Federal Reserve. Okay, so what happens is, think about a business. Think about a business that manufactures any product. They have costs, what they call cost of sales, materials. They have to pay for labor and overhead. Right? There's zero cost of sales here with the Federal Reserve. They literally create a product called money out of nothing. Then they lend it to the government. They buy T-bills. That's how we get our debt. And we as taxpayers got to pay back with interest to them. Okay? So they take these T-bills and they load them up to all these member banks. Now, the only people that can own stock in these corporations are the banks, and they're required to own stock. All the banks are required to be part of the Federal Reserve System. And there's a lot more to that in terms of what they do with reserves and how they risk our economy. But there is zero incentive to have a stable economy, because what ends up happening is and that, by the way, is their mandate, is to stabilize the economy.
Right.
And, when they loan money out like that, then they say, okay, well, that's inflationary. So now we have to raise interest rates to the banks and make debt harder to get, which includes mortgages, by the way, and business loans. So they raise the interest rates. That's why our interest rates now are over 7%. And it kills the economy. Now you got joblessness. It's called stagflation, where you've got inflation, joblessness, and a slow economy. And that's what we got right now. And it's going to get worse as time goes on.
Right.
So if you look
so how, I'm sorry to interrupt. And so, how this would tie to Marxism, to this, ideology, would be, to me, again, putting it in, my simple Simon terms, and listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking, well, even though that guy, that Jared, or was that his name, Jared, sounds and probably is a bit of a dolt, a bit of a doofus.
Don't insult dolts, by the way. I know some good dolts.
But when you listen to him, you almost have to set him aside for a minute and go and think, well, this isn't by accident. This isn't by acts of stupidity or ignorance. I mean, how can this not be deliberate? This crashing of the economy, this destruction, really, everything that's happening right now. I mean, the tie-ins are just a little too much to be coincidental, right? So, how do we look at that through that lens and essentially fight against it. I mean, and I know you said, and I agree with you 100%, like I guess it's maybe the true answer is that, you have to be educated in these things. And it is overwhelming. Like this is a lot really of new or only like half learned information that, I got in my formative years that I don't even think they're teaching to our kids now. Right.
No, they're not.
So you're essentially, as adults, you're essentially like starting from scratch. It might as well be from scratch and getting to these, really valid, good resources like your podcast where, you can get this information broken down for you and explained so that you are armed with this information and this understanding of how it all works.
That's right.
Because if we don't understand how it works, we can't fight against it. We're just going to keep getting snowed basically by, this corrupt government system.
Well, you see, the money supply is something people can't really wrap their arms around. You can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even know it's there. You don't even know what it is. What's a money supply, right?
Right.
But it is an inventory of money that's in the marketplace today, just like there's an inventory right now of automobiles or houses or tomatoes or name it. Okay. And but the money part of it scares people and they can't conceptualize it.
Yeah.
So it makes it harder for them to understand. But the Federal Reserve, by the way, is responsible for every single economic calamity since they've been enacted in 1913, which was done on December 23rd. Woodrow Wilson signed it into law, but Congress was away. Most of the Congress was away on December 23rd, 1913. And that's when they passed this. Okay. And they snuck it in. J.P. Morgan was the guy behind that. But we had a post-World War I recession in 1918 and 19, depression in 1920 and 21, the stock market crash in 1929, the Great Depression that continued in the 1930s. The Fed raised interest rates and made it impossible for the economy to revive itself, especially farmers. You hear about the Dust Bowls.
Yeah.
Those Dust Bowls were farmers who couldn't afford any investment and they let their farms go to waste. Okay, that was the Great Depression that lasted longer than it should have, 10 years. We had the stagflation in the 70s, the recession in 80, 82, at the Carter years. I mean, I remember getting raises. I just got out of college and I was getting 15% raises a year, Elsa.
Wow.
Cost of living. This is cost of living. It wasn't performance. Yeah. Then we had the Great Recession in the 2007 and 8-9 timeframe. All of this was a result of the Federal Reserve. Every single one of these, plus others I didn't mention, were there. Okay. Now, I'll just think, and by the way, the Federal Reserve, the interest that we pay to them, they get to cover their expenses, and anything over that interest they have to pay back to the government. They hardly ever do. You want to know why? A, there's no transparency of their finances. We can't see it. Congressman can see it. The last guy that really asked for it was Ron Paul, and he got demonized by that. Right. But they have right now 50 Lear jets and cargo planes. They have a full-time curator for their massive paintings and sculptures. Why does the Federal Reserve have paintings and sculptures? Hundreds of $billions of assets. They have it that a janitor was paid $163,000 30 years ago. Okay. Because what they're doing is saying, we ain't giving this money back to the government. We're just going to keep it for ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay. And enrich ourselves.
And if anybody else was this bad at their job, they would have been fired a long time ago.
Come on.
Right?
Come on. Give me a break. Right.
Yeah.
So
it's
anyway,
crazy.
Now what does this have to do with Marxism? Okay. Remember, Marxism is about control.
Yes.
Okay. And this is how they control. Well, you control the economy. They basically control the economy. That's the control they have on us. Okay. And we didn't talk much about digital currency, but if that gets in, we're in big trouble. Okay. Because they can start dictating all kinds of stuff to us. And I want to just kind of, so basically what do? We push on Congress the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 does allow Congress to modify it or to abolish it. Okay. And we've got to push on Congress to abolish the Federal Reserve and let the free market take its course in terms of interest rates and everything else. The gold standard is tied into this. And here's why. Well, let me just give you this basket of goods thing. In 1790, a basket of goods cost $100. And that same basket in 1913, the year the Federal Reserve was passed, was only $108. Went up $8 in 120 some odd years. Okay? Now, 1913, right? In 2008, when we had that economic collapse, that basket of goods that was $108 in 1913 would now be valued at $2,422. That's inflation. That's the kind of inflation.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. That's what I'm talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And I fear, Elsa, that if our country does go down, you asked this question a couple of podcasts ago, do you see any hope? The economic collapse is a real possibility that will tear this country down.
Yeah.
And it's happened time and time again in other countries. So that is the fear, right? That we're just not going to be able to get out of this debt now past $35 trillion. So, but the gold standard, let me briefly just talk to you real quick about what this is. We had a gold standard that said the money supply cannot increase past the value of the gold in our reserves. Okay. And that put a limit on this printing of money. You couldn't print money past the value of the gold. All right. So that kept a cap on the money supply, which kept inflation in check. Okay. Well, in the 30s, FDR pretty much got rid of the gold standard. We had what's called the Bretton Woods agreements in 1944, Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, where 44 nations agreed to be on the gold standard to stabilize currency, and the U.S. dollar would have become the international currency of trade, which is now at risk. That got relaxed, and eventually in 1972, Nixon got rid of the gold standard altogether, which opened up the kimonos, if you will, for the Federal Reserve to just print money that gave you that $2,400 price index. Okay, so the gold standard went away, and we now have what we call fiat money. There's no country in the world tied to any precious metal, whether it be gold or silver. Okay, including the United States, and this is why everything's spinning out of control. So going back to the gold standard and pushing legislation there is legislation out there right now that is in fact looking to get back onto a gold standard, right? Don't even know where that is. But again, I've written my congressmen and senators and said, hey, look, this is what we got to get back onto. So the gold standard is a real key part of this whole economic collapse that we're seeing here. And remember, all of this has to do with control. That's what the Marxists want.
Right.
That's what they
it's
want.
Control every aspect, really, right? If you control the government, if you control speech, if you control every aspect of what everyone does, you win. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And look at the tax we're paying. And real quick, I got the gold standard. I think I covered everything. Those are the kind of things that we have to push our government to be able to do, right? And those are at least the 6 things that I can talk about now about how we can push back on Marxism. These are the solutions that we have to get the right people in office,
right?
A, understand, and B, have the guts to go out and do this. Now, we do have people in here that will do this. Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of them. Eli Crane here, who beat me for Congress. He's a great congressman. Paul Gosar is a good friend of mine. He was on my show a week and a half ago. And Andy Biggs. We have some really good congressmen here in Arizona. I don't think you have very many good ones up where you are. You've got a bunch of globalists up there.
Yeah.
But we have to keep plugging away and getting the right people in office. So.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think that's the point that we need to keep driving, right? To anyone who will listen, be informed, be proactive, be active, be vocal, be involved. Right. You have to. And I've heard this before. And I remember hearing this from somebody because I had lamented the same lament that like this just seems so overwhelming. Like, how do you affect change? How do you do anything about this when it's so it is such a tangled web of everything, which I think, of course, is very deliberate to make you feel exactly like that. And, then you add to it and we can all relate to this, that you're just so busy you're just so busy living your life that like to add this one massively huge thing really to it is just one thing too many, I think, for so many people. And they're like, we're fine. I mean, we're doing well enough. It's okay. We'll deal with it. We'll figure it out. And you just kind of get complacent, I think. But that's why we're here. That's how we got to here. We let them beat us down. We let them, just make us weary. And that's really what we are. We're weary. We're so damn tired of all of it and frustrated. And now we're at a point where like, we don't even know where to begin. Like, how do you start unraveling this, mass of tangled knots that we're in right now? And there is no easy fix, unfortunately, right? The fix is what we keep saying and what we keep driving forward, which is to be informed and be active and get other people involved and work on your local level, because that's where it starts. That's where you have to start. There's no other place to start. You have to start, and you affect change where you are, in your corner of the world, in your little spot. And you just pray and work towards getting that to ripple outwards. Now, you did a phenomenal job covering all of the, the government side, the Constitution side, the legislative and Congress and all of that side of, the Marxist attack and how to combat that on that level. On a more, social level, I found a really good article, and yay me, I missed part of the part that pronounced the guy's name. So I'm just going to put it in the comment section later. But, a couple of the things that they were saying is, don't think like a Marxist, reject viewing the world through Marxist conflicts like gender, race, or class struggles, and instead recognize, now this is a religious, came from a faith-based article, recognize that sin as the root cause of social problems. And I thought that was a really, really great point. And not to just like resist be anti-communist, anti-socialist, anti-Marxist, that's all great. Of course, we're anti that, but, really, again, to drive home that point one more time, educate, learn, you have to pay attention. Like some of us, on the right, and this can go for people on the left as well, that you kind of bury your head in the sand because you don't want to know. You just don't want to be burdened by all of it. Hence Kamala telling everyone that they can be unburdened, right? But, I
hope on November 4th we're going to be unburdened.
Please, we need to be unburdened. And that really kind of in a nutshell, that this regime cannot stay in power. We can't let them. Because we're in big trouble. But, that is it in a nutshell. We just cannot allow that to happen.
And it's a lot deeper than this regime, too, because there's players behind the scene that are pulling all the strings, as we all know. But, when you get back to this whole Marxist movement, that's been going on for quite some time. Believe me, it didn't just start with Biden.
Right.
It's all about, to me, it's a sin to play on people's greed and their envy and their jealousy. And when I can say, well, come on, look at the car you're driving. How come I don't get to drive that car? Who did you steal it from? You must have did something, because I would never look at my inadequacies to say, maybe I'm not as talented as you.
Right.
Maybe I'm not as smart as you. Maybe I'm not as ambitious as you. Okay. I actually had a relative tell me one time, you didn't earn anything that you have, you just got lucky. Oh, I swear to God. Oh, yeah.
Those are fighting words.
He was a relative. Okay. I won't say who he was. I hope he won't be listening to something like this, of course. He's too smart for that. And he said that, and I looked at him and I said, well, let me ask you something. I said, and by the way, this guy fancied himself as a genius. Okay?
Of course.
He was a Trivia Pursuit expert. He knew everything and all this. And
they're always smarter than us. That's the law.
Yeah.
Right?
Said, you didn't earn that. You just got lucky. I said, well, I did get lucky. I was born in the United States. If I was born in India, I wouldn't. I think I got real lucky. You kidding me? And so did you, by the way. So what's your excuse? That's what I said to him.
Good. Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so, but that's the and I've been told, my white male privilege is what got me my success. Well, wait a minute.
Yes.
I know a lot of white males that didn't make it and didn't have success that I had. And I know some that had more success. So I'm thinking, well, then all white males should, if you have a brother who didn't make it and you made it and you had the same parents, the same upbringing, the same neighborhood, how the heck could that be?
Right.
Okay.
Right. You see examples like that all the time. Siblings in the same household, raised by the same parents, all the same thing. One, takes their circumstances and uses it as fuel to excel, and the other uses it as their excuse to fail. Basically, it's.
But as you read the Communist Manifesto, you see all of this banter that Karl Marx talked about between the proletariats, which are the working class,
right,
and the bourgeoisie, right, which are really the middle class, not even the rich. Oh yeah, they're that too. But he looked at them saying, they stole everything from the working class, and he pitted them against each other to the degree that that Stalin had the proletariats go after the bourgeoisie, I should say, with pitchforks. They were fighting. I mean, they were killing each
other.
Okay, and he used that class warfare, which is such an easy thing to get people jealous, right? Without really understanding the root cause of why there are differences.
Right.
Okay. And don't get me wrong. I am not trying to sit here and say there's not racism.
Right.
But when you tell me there's institutional racism, I want you to give me an example. When you tell me this,
and then the next layer of that, Mark, is, when you look at all of these big institutions and big places where they're saying that there's institutionalized racism, most of them are run by people on the left. So, that's a little suspicious.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. But look, if you could point institutional racism, I'll go and march with you to that organization and protest with you. Okay.
Right.
But they can't do that. Okay. They can't do that. And so, this is all about pitting groups against each other so that as we're fighting, the tyrants can continue their ascent to power. And I got to go back to my favorite American, Thomas Jefferson. I just think this guy was unbelievable. He had a great saying here, and I'm going to read it. There is nothing more unequal than the equal treatment of unequal people.
Wow.
That's deep.
Yeah, it is. That's actually, that could not have been a more perfect way to put a bow on this conversation, because that is perfect. I'm putting that on the screen, guys. You need to read that over and over again, because that is such a direct response to what's going on right now. I mean, you couldn't get a more better quote than that for this conversation, or for life, really, right now, what we're living in. Again, this conversation can and will go on more, because there's so much more to be said about it, and so much more, that we can explore with it. So as I think I did before, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to put my thumb on you and say, you're going to come back?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I told you what it's going to take.
I know. That's right. That's right. What was it? Tiramisu, right?
I did make a mistake. I said 2 glasses of wine. It's got now 3.
We're up to 3. Okay. Fair enough. Listen, we're getting a couple bottles anyhow. Come on. We're just going to party.
We're going to move the unit of measure to bottles in a minute. If you keep
exactly. Oh, my friend, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your absolute wealth of information with me and anyone else who just doesn't know the things. I mean, I'm the first one to admit it. I'll tell you one more thing real quick, because maybe you have some intel on this one, on how to get it. So I saw a video from Charlie Kirk, who I just love to pieces. I think that man is just so smart.
I met with Charlie. We had about an hour and a half meeting.
Yeah. I love him. I just love him more and more. The more I see him, the more I love him. And the little video clip that I saw, he was talking to college kids outside of a campus, and one was trying to match wits with him, which was just the silliest thing ever. And they were holding a pamphlet that Charlie Kirk either hands out or gives out or sells. I'm not sure what the case is, but it was basically the Constitution for third graders, essentially. And that was kind of the premise of the guy's argument, that why are you giving this, to college students? We're college students, not third graders. And, and his response was, the gist of it was, well, because your understanding is at a third grade level, let me test you. And he's like, well, you're not even at a third grade level. So, but all joking aside, and I say that with no shame whatsoever, I want that pamphlet. I want that book for myself. I want to read that. So if anybody has if you have any intel how to get it, I looked on his website. I didn't see it.
By the way, I am sending you, I just made an order last night with a bunch of books that are coming your way.
Yay! I love it.
Everybody needs to have these books, but we'll talk about them afterwards.
Good. That'll be part of our next conversation. We'll be talking about those books. Sound good?
I don't want to let people know what they are. So
all right, we're not telling them anything. You're gonna have to tune in.
That means you'll know, and then it won't be a surprise.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
All right, let me say goodbye to everyone. Mark, thank you again for coming on the show. I appreciate you so much. And guys, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you so much. We appreciate you joining in every week. And we just look forward to bringing you more content, more information, more stuff so that you can share it to others as well. Have a great rest of your day, evening, morning, whatever the case is, whenever you're watching this. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
Get ready for the much-anticipated return of Elsa Kurt's beloved series, Welcome to Chance, on October 24th, 2024. Set in coastal New England, this small-town saga captivates with its intricate tales of life and love. Follow the intertwined lives of 5 unique families as they navigate the complexities of their picturesque community. Experience the charm and drama of Chance, where every character has a story that tugs at your heart. Whether you're a returning fan or a newcomer, there's something for everyone to enjoy and connect with. Pre-order your copy now and immerse yourself in the enchanting world that Elsa Kurt masterfully brings to life. Don't miss the opportunity to fall in love all over again with the unforgettable stories of Welcome to Chance.